So the Wild Atlantic Way is a driving route running along the Atlantic coast of Ireland from Kinsale, which isn't really on the Atlantic coast, all the way to Muff in Donegal. It's about 2,500 kilometres of driving, and it's got somewhere between 170 and 180 of these stops with the rusted effect signposts you're seeing here, nearly all on the coastline itself. It's somewhere between 170 and 180. That's actually because different numbers are even given on the official website, and I'll give you a look at that in a moment. And the question is, can you cycle it? And the answer to that is definitely yes. However, cycling the route itself, as you'll find on the website, probably isn't to be recommended because it's a route designed for people in cars to get from one point to another relatively fast and in a way that doesn't create excess traffic, and that's not really the sort of thing you want to be on if you're cycling some of the time, in particular where it's following what are called national roads in Ireland. They have the letter N designating them. They tend to be very busy, and often in rural areas there won't be any hard shoulder, and there certainly won't be any cycle lane. Now, Eurovelo 1 follows or parallels the route for quite a long way, although it goes inland a lot more, so that would be one option. But what I'm going to do in this video is instead show you a couple of options I've designed which keep you away from those main roads, and either there's a short option which just gets you to the major discovery points, or a much longer one that goes to everything of interest. That much longer one ends up being about 3,500 kilometers in length, and you're doing 38,000 meters of ascent as you go along it. Sometimes people think if you cycle coastlines, they're going to be fairly flat. That might be the case in some other countries. It's definitely not the case in Ireland. There's an awful lot of hills on the coastline. You're not going over some of the highest points in the country, but in fact, following this route, the highest point is the Sleevely Cliffs, which are 598 metres. So if you're cycling to 598 metres from sea level, that's a fair ascent. But anyway, let's have a look at the different options. So I'm basing my descriptions of these routes on my own experience of cycling most of them. I did this via Ebike. You'll see my bike in a lot of the photographs. And I largely camped. I largely wild camped, in fact. It's easy enough to find spots where you will get away with wild camping. Although wild camping in Ireland normally isn't legal. It's just got a very kind of complicated setup, basically, but most of the time you won't be bothered if you're camping dusk to dawn. And I mostly managed to charge my batteries in pubs or in restaurants while I was eating or drinking. So that's definitely possible. You know, if you're kind of coming here and you're going, is this possible to do by e-bike? Yes, no problem at all. And in fact, I think e-bikes, it's probably a very strong recommendation for them, particularly if you're not some kind of lycra-clad, amazing level of fitness person, just because there are so many hills on this route. There's so many ups, there's so many downs. And in fact, the routes I'm suggesting, which are keeping you off the main roads, the disadvantage of staying off the main roads is the main roads at least are really flat. Well, sorry, not really flat, they're comparatively flat, whereas once you hit the side roads, they really do go up and down every single valley. Now, that also means they're going to be very much more beautiful. Most of the pictures you're seeing here are actually on the route itself. That's the route I'm actually suggesting, so you'll get a quick idea of just what you're liable to expect. And there's also very many really stunning discovery points that are worth stopping for. And I'm also going to talk about some things that aren't discovery points on the Wild Atlantic Way, but I think you should definitely go to short detours of like 3, 4, 5 kilometers, particularly some of the stone circles, for instance, that aren't on it are very worth visiting. So anyway, not all of these are the Wild Atlantic Way. These ones you're looking at now are actually the East Coast, but you can find my complete set of Irish coast cycles. I'm cycling the entire coastline. I have 40 day-to-day videos up at the moment on the playlist that I created for that purpose. But anyway, let's go on to look at the specifics of the route. So this is the official route map, which you will find on the Discover Ireland website. The route was launched in 2014, and it's been a kind of stunning example of tourist branding success. I think it's probably the name itself is quite evocative, but actually it kind of does make sense. I mean, it does take you through some of the most fantastic rural scenery in Ireland, and there's a lot of actually very pretty towns on the route as well. A couple have been, probably suffer a bit from too much tourism, Killarney in particular, which is actually off the route. But, basically you're going to enjoy doing it. So the way the official route works is they have, I think, 15 key signature points, which are these round circles on the map. And then the line between them is the road route that connects them up. Now, the road route is indicated by signage, which is basically a blue rectangle with a little wavy line through it. And I'll show you one of those here in a moment. But if we zoom in on this map, so you can see that there's nothing here between these two signature points, but when you click on one of them, it then fills in all the other points where I think they have signposts, right? So this essentially is a map of where there are those rust effect signposts and of the road that leads to those signposts. And again, it's taking a road that's the most convenient route for cars. In some cases, that's not the best route at all for cyclists. In fact, it's often enough, it's the worst. So this map is a good way of getting your bearings. Some people do actually cycle that route. And to be honest, if you're cycling a road bike with very thin wheels, then there might be a case for doing it that way, because at least most of the Wild Atlantic roads themselves have a good surface on them, because they're part of the tourism industry. Whereas the routes I'm going to suggest, which take you down rural roads and local roads, those roads maybe got surfaced 10 or 15 years ago and have suffered from weather and vehicles ever since. They can be quite rough. They often have grass growing down the middle. I mean, the absolute favourites are the ones where there's grass growing down the middle. And, if you're on a bike that's got relatively delicate wheels, that might prove a little bit too much, both in terms of punctures and potentially buckles. But if you're on any sort of touring bike at all, then they're absolutely gorgeous. And many of these roads, you'll meet almost no traffic whatsoever. A lot of the time, the only traffic you'll run into is the occasional bit of agricultural machinery, which can be a bit alarming because these things are huge, but you'll hear them long before you even see them. And then just locals, doing the run back and forth to the shops. There's some points on the route where you can't avoid the main roads, and that's basically some of the peninsulas, particularly the Dingle Peninsula up here, and that's because there's basically mountains running down the centre of this, and there's only one road going down this way, so you're absolutely stuck on the main road for a stretch of this. But I will, when we get there, show you the by roads you can take that at least manage to skip the worst of that. That's the route. If we scroll quickly up through it, you're getting an idea of it here. And as you'll see, it also goes out to a lot of the islands. Now, I have included the islands in my route. There's ferries going to the ones they routed to. On those ferries, you can take a bike. And I think the island culture is probably something not to be missed. However, it does take a chunk of extra time because you obviously have to wait till there's a ferry leaving, same coming back. There's the time spent on the ferry. So if you wanted to do a quicker version of any of these, or if you're on a schedule, you're a couple of days behind and you want to make distance, then you can simply start skipping the islands as the easy way out. So I'm going to be using the cycle.travel website to show you the routes, but also because you're going to be able to download a GPX file from that website, or indeed run it on a smartphone when you're doing the route, and it will give you basic directions. Cycle.travel I started using when I started using cycle touring, basically because it has a very, very good free option that gives you most of the things, it gives you everything you need in order to do it. After I'd used it for a few months, I upgraded to the paid tier. That basically gives you additional maps and stuff, and the additional maps can be lucky can be handy if you're looking for wild camping spots. But you can absolutely use it successfully without paying anything. So I actually do think it's one of those things that's worth paying for. But you don't need to make that decision yet. So it's just cycle.travel, and their app is also called cycle.travel. So here we can see the route I have mapped out. Now this route is the discovery points route, so that's the 15 or so key discovery points, and this route's really for somebody who wants to say they've done the Wild Atlantic Way but doesn't have much time. It's about 1,700 kilometers, and you could probably do that reasonably in 3 weeks, and if you're very fit you could probably shorten that to 2. So going in on it, again, it starts at Kinsale. So one of the key differences between this and the other routes I'll show you is this does large inland segments because it's only going between those discovery routes. So the other good thing about cycle.travel is its default is to route you along quiet back roads. It's really very good at doing that. So if it's doing this sort of inland loop, that probably makes the most sense. And it on the peninsula itself, it's mostly, because I'm very familiar with these, it's managed to find back roads to get you down to the tips of them rather than sending you down the main road, which is where the Wild Atlantic Way would send you. There's bits of this you could modify by going using Eurovelo instead, but you will add quite a bit to the actual length. So this is the route for people that are impatient. Now, I did modify it, which is because I have cycled this, I'm aware that there are points on this route where really with very, very small diversions, you're going to come across quite stunning things that are worth seeing. And that's particularly Urg Stone Circle, for instance, which I have this diversion here. I think it's about 3 or 4 kilometers. There's a beautiful lake followed by the Stone Circle. It's well worth taking that little trip off it. Or the other thing is down here, for instance, where the default would be to route you in and out on this road, but actually there's this loop here which only adds a couple of kilometers again, but sends you down a piece of spectacular coastline. So I think I added about 5 or 6 different points along the route, and you'll spot those because they're a number. So whenever there's a number, either there's something at the number, so the discovery points, there's something I've added, or I've put the number in there to drag the route along that particular way out. And often that's to stop you going in one road and then coming out the same road again, which would be kind of dull. But I'm aware that there's a nearby road that you can use instead. That's probably very beautiful, and that doesn't really add anything to your distance. If you're curious, the amount of distance that actually added for the entire 1,750 odd kilometers for me adding this additional points is about 31 kilometers. So it's not very much. If you're in a hurry, you want to do it quickly, then this is the route to take. I'm not sure that's really in the spirit of the Wild Atlantic Way, but not everybody has the time to spend what it would be 6 weeks, realistically, to complete the whole route. Now, of course, you don't need to do it in a single go. You could come back and do it over a couple of years or whatever, but I'll understand if you need to take the short, fast route. So this next route is all the official stops. So as I said, depending on which version of the website you go with, that's somewhere between 170 and 180 stops. I think I've got the 180 in here. And this is about 3,075 kilometers and involves about, let me see here, 2,700 meters of climbing. So that's an ambitious cycle. You know, you're really talking 4 to 5 weeks, even doing it quite fast, 6 weeks allowing for the weather. And it goes out to all the islands as well. So as we zoom in, you'll immediately see it's going much closer to the coast consistently than that other route, which was going inland for this particular section. And there's bits of the coast that it gets extremely noodly, and that's because of the structure of the Irish coastline. On the Atlantic side is lots and lots of often quite long inlets, and these are often quite mountainous as well. So you very often end up going to a road that runs most of the way down, and then at the end of that road, if there's multiple discovery points, you'll have 5 kilometers this way, 3 kilometers that way, 8 kilometers that way to visit each of them. The other thing to be aware of is because these are often at quite mountainous locations, that often means you're going to be going up quite high, down to sea level to reach a point, back up to quite a high point, down to sea level to reach another point. So keep that in mind when you're thinking about your daily distances. However, don't be discouraged by that, because if you're doing this cycle not so much for the destination but the journey, all of these places are really worth visiting, and in fact so too are the roads connecting them for the most part. There's very, very little cycling that could be described as boring along these routes whatsoever. Maybe a little bit coming out of East Cork, but even there, not really. So anyway, you can see all the numbers here on it. You have about 180 stops, and on this one, unlike the previous one, it's going down the bottom of all the peninsulas. Sheep's Head Peninsula here, for instance, isn't on the signature route at all. It just gets skipped over, but here you're going right down. People often ask me which my favourite part I've cycled is, and the answer is you can't really say that. All of these peninsulas in particular in the southwest are all spectacular and often in quite different ways. In fact, as you go from north to south, the northern one is the most rugged. That's the peninsula Dingle is on, and then down here, kind of Mizzen Head, is probably the one that is still pretty rugged, but is more lower lying on average. Climate wise, this is also kind of the warmest but often also the wettest bit of the country. As you go more onto the Atlantic coast itself, and as you head north, it's going to be wetter and colder. So that's one thing to keep in mind if you're intending to do the entire trip in a single go, which would be about 6 weeks of cycling. Then the best months to be doing that are probably May and June, or September and October, maybe a little bit going into July and a little bit going into August at either of those. That way you're missing most of the tourist traffic. That'll make finding accommodation easier. I mean, you'll have less likely to hassle while camping. It should generally be fairly easy to walk into places and get a meal, although at the extremes there, a lot of places won't have opened yet, so do keep that in mind. But anyway, if you're doing it early in the year, I would start at the south and head north, so you're getting the milder weather here, and as the summer arrives, although the Irish summer, pretty random, you're heading north, so it doesn't matter so much that it gets colder. Or if you're doing it late, then start at the north and head south for the same reason. People often go, well, which way is the prevailing wind going? And what I say to them is, if you actually look at the route, that kind of doesn't really matter, because every day you're going north, you're going south, you're going east, you're going west. And even within any of these, you're going north, south, east and west every few kilometres. So I wouldn't worry too much about prevailing winds. The Atlantic coast, the weather is not really predictable. It can be going one way in the morning, the opposite way in the evening. It wouldn't be my main consideration in terms of planning. A lot of the time, of course, all the time the sun is going to be setting in the east, so that might affect your decision making in terms of trying to avoid cycling into the sun or not. But again, there's too many zigzags for that to make a huge difference. So anyway, this is the route that goes to every single of the Discovery signposts, as I said. There are a lot of them. There are a lot of loops on this route. You're going to be covering a lot of ground, but in my opinion, it's not quite enough. And so the next one I'm going to show you adds a little bit more to that. So we might call this option my Miss Nothing route. Actually, go to Ireland, you're going to miss stuff. There's just too much to see. But at least for the Atlantic coastline, this means you'll probably get to just about everything you could possibly want to get to. It is 3,650 kilometres, so about 600 kilometres longer than that previous route. But the more scary statistic might be that it's 35,000 metres of climbing, which is another 7,000 metres of ascent, basically, along the route. So what this route does is there are a lot of spots on the Wild Atlantic Way route, or near the Wild Atlantic Way route, that the Wild Atlantic Way doesn't have a signpost for yet. Who knows, in some cases they may have in future, but I think in a lot of cases that's because these are spots where the roads down to them are particularly bad, and often where there's no parking potential at the end of the road of whatever the thing you're going to look at. This includes some of the stone circles and smaller castles. So I think they've made the decision that there's no point signposting cars to these particular spots, because if they send a car down, a long road that's only single track, there's no parking at the end of it, then they're obviously just going to be causing hassle both for the tourists trying to visit that spot and of course for the locals, who will not be too pleased by having lots of traffic on the road. However, great thing about cycle touring is you're not taking up space in anything like the same way. You don't really need any space to park at anywhere. You can just lean the bike up against a wall or whatever. And also you have the potential to stop in other spots where cars would just not be able to. So this route includes all those Wild Atlantic Way signposts that are in the previous map, but also adds, I think, about 30 places that I'm aware of from doing my coast cycles that I think are really worth visiting and are really good additions. And that includes, just to pick a single example out, for instance, is when you're on the Dingle Peninsula. I think it's probably well worth doing the climb on Mount Bandon that goes to the Paternoster Lakes, and there's a little car park here that you can get to that from. So yeah, there's multiple additional things I have added. I haven't added everything that's in my if you watch the 40 day-to-day cycling diaries covering the entire coast, there's additional things I haven't put in there. Like one thing that interests me personally is you come across a lot of monuments on the on some of these routes to Irish Republicans killed, particularly in the War of Independence in the 1920s, but also going back as far as 1798. I think those are quite interesting. But actually, if you're following my route, you're going to be passing those anyway. So there are things you'll come across on the route that you may find of interest that are just simply not marked as a point. So don't be afraid to stop otherwise. So yeah, that is the additional one. And I'm going to show you at this point one other cool feature of Cycle.travel, which is if you click on the little mountain icon here, it'll show you where the hills are. And then you can hover on one of these and click on it, and it'll bring you to that bit of the map. So here's the highest point of the entire route, which is up by the Sleeve League Cliffs, basically. And you can sort of spot where the climbing is going to come from. If you do a copy of the map and then do a day-to-day breakdown of it, you get that in a lot more detail. But it can be kind of handy to know what's coming up as you're going around. So anyway, these are the maps for the Wild Atlantic Way cycle. As I said, completely possible to do it. It is ambitious. I think it's particularly suitable for e-bikes because you're really going to appreciate that battery at the end of a day, or on one of those days where you're coming to a high central point and then repeatedly descending to the coast and coming back to that high point to visit multiple spots. I have done all this mostly camping, mostly wild camping. I kind of stay in B&Bs to get a shower every few nights, basically, and just have a break and sometimes to catch up on sleep. But I found the whole experience of doing it absolutely fantastic. I think lots more people should cycle it. And one of the things I like about e-bikes, and why I bought one myself, is it opens up the potential for doing that kind of long distance cycle touring to a lot more people who might otherwise just feel they weren't particularly up for the distances. But anyway, I hope you do it. If you do, maybe post a comment under the video to let me know, and you'll find the links to all these maps in the description that I'll include underneath the video here, so you'll be able to click directly through to the cycle travel one. Great website, thoroughly recommended. As I said, you can put the app on your phone and then use the directions as you go along, and of course you can also modify my maps, creating your own ones out of it if you want to add additional points of interest. I hope that's encouraged you to attempt the Wild Atlantic Way. Do give the video a like if you found it useful, and do give the channel a follow to catch future updates from me.